So, in collaboration with the United Nations Environment Programme's hosted Climate and Clean Air Coalition, we have a very special daily focus on this year on super pollutants and especially on methane. Which is why I'm delighted to welcome here in the studio, here in Baku at COP29, Martina Otto. She's head of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. Hi, Martina.
Hello, Nick.
Yeah,
pleasure to be here with you.
It's great to see you too. So, Martina, for the audience out there, we may have 5 million people watching the show right now in, like 160 countries. Can you briefly explain where are the methane emissions coming from? And what could happen if the world could achieve really big, rapid, fast, scaled up cuts in this gas?
Right. Absolutely. Well, methane is a key lever for us. It's probably the best, maybe the only bet that we have to put us on a 1.5 pathway. Now, let me explain that. Methane is extremely powerful. It's about 80 times more powerful than CO2 with regard to warming potential, and that over a shorter period of time of 20 years. So that means if we reduce methane, it is not accumulating in the atmosphere, but it actually drives down. And that means we have a lever on near-term warming. And that is a little bit the lifeboat that we may have. You said buying time, but it's exactly that. In terms of the impact, we save a bit of time for the decarbonization efforts to come into effect. And we can avoid some of those tipping points. And 1.5 was not coming out of thin air. It was a moment to think that then some changes in the ecosystems, for example, will happen, and that may be irreversible. And if we take action on methane, we are able to rein that in. Now, we have done a global methane assessment that showed action needs to be taken in the fossil fuel sector, in the agriculture sector, in the waste sector. And we're not talking about net zero as we do with CO2. We talk about 60 to 80% of reductions in the fossil fuel sector. We talk about 30 to 35% in the waste sector. We talk about 25% in the agricultural sector. And that is absolutely doable, and it's doable at low and often even at negative cost. And we can, and that's the absolute beauty of it, we can harness health benefits because these pollutants are also air pollutants, and we can harness food security benefits as well because there's an impact on our ecosystems and how our plant growth is impeded.
Okay, good. That's very comprehensive. So multiple benefits we have, not just including climate change, and it would seem, as you say, because the costs of it are not so outrageous, that in fact negative costs in many of these cases, if not all, that it would seem to be a great investment for society to make in the future of our planet and its people. Let me just get this clear in my head because we were talked a little bit before, but we're here at COP29. One of the big issues, or two of the big issues, are governments revising up their national climate action plans, the so-called NDCs, which use the jargon. And you want to see, and I think a lot of other people who care passionately about this topic want to see the NDCs here, and as we go to Brazil next year for the next climate conference, to have methane really embedded in the plans of nations. So that's correct, yes?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Good. And the other thing is this COP is about finance, and we need finance for this, which turns us really back to what I want you to ask a little bit, or I want to ask you a little bit about what is the theme of today's show. So give us a perspective into what we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely. This COP is branded the Finance COP, and we need to get more finance into methane action. We have seen it's about at 2% of climate finance that goes into methane action. That needs to be stepped up at least 3.5 times to make the dent that we need to see. And one key step for that is actually to include methane in these nationally determined contributions. And why is that? Because it gives a strong policy signal with a target. And I think it's clear the money follows the ambition. And that means these NDCs become investment plans for the future. Now, the Global Methane Pledge has a target to reduce methane by 30% from 2020 levels by 2030. So there's a 2030 element. The NDCs that are due now, the revisions, will take us to exactly that period. And at the same time, we have scientists who've told us that we might hit 1.5 already within the next 5 years. So that brings it really home why it's critical to have methane and other short-lived climate pollutants embedded in these NDCs. And we have put out, the CCAC, we have put out guidance on how to do that, to help countries to do that. That was a special request that we got. We're also supporting over 30 countries with exactly that process. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing more of that.
Right. And Martina, I think you've already mentioned, but with these concerted efforts, with ambitious action on methane, plus also keeping the pressure on the decarbonisation of the global economy, this is not an either-or situation. This is about making sure the searchlight is on all the pollutants that cause climate change. In the past, maybe the methane and these other super pollutants were a little bit more in the shade or not in the dark in some cases if we go back long enough. Bringing them out, illuminating them, so that everyone knows they're there, what they do, and what benefits we could get if we acted hard, whilst also keeping up the pedal on CO2. So it's not an either-or situation.
No, it's not an either-or situation, and we actually really have to make sure that this finance ecosystem that is really coming together is moving forward. And we, for example, are working with the multilateral development banks. We call it a handshake process. We are working with the bilateral donors in the development aid system context to look at, could there be criteria to actually make sure that methane is not sort of an afterthought, but that it's actually really built in, and maybe some of the health benefits are built in as well. We have seen philanthropies coming forward, very much so. They've really stepped up. But then it becomes almost, who is doing what best, and how can we stitch the different levels of funding together in a way that it really adds up.
Yeah, got you. Good. So we're now going to be welcoming in a few seconds our special guest, but I think we've got what's known as a bumper first. So let's have our bumper. So let's meet some more terrific guests that are joining us on this show here at COP29 in Baku in Azerbaijan. I'm going to introduce first Marcelo Mena, the CEO of the Global Methane Hub, who's with us in our studio today. That's fantastic. Marcelo, how is your work contributing to what I might say bridging the finance gap we have right now between methane action and methane funding?
Great, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be with our colleagues here from CCAC, from the COP presidency, and of course our colleagues at the World Bank, I assume in Washington, D.C. So we are working, we came about when the Global Methane Pledge was launched 3 years ago. It's been 3 years and 158 countries have joined. But when they joined this methane pledge, they said, well, you need to help us learn how to do this because it's something new, it's new road, it's new sectors that we have overlooked: waste, agriculture, energy. And so we've been able to deploy already around $250 million in grant funding to help countries have methane targets, including groups like the CCAC, who's helped many groups. We also have been working supporting the China commitments and having different technical capacities be provided so China could have a very important target. They announced for the first time they have On coal methane, they will have a large target because China is a major emitter, and we'll see them in like an hour from now when in the methane summit they show their new progress. And of course, we fund the satellite work, the International Methane Emissions Observatory, but also Carbon Mapper and Methane Sat, which are the major new satellites that today an article in the Financial Times shows that, you know, we are going to see the real emissions, not the ones that companies report, and we'll be able to reduce those emissions because many companies have not seen these emissions and they could have that opportunity to address it. So there are many ways. And one last way is the research and development for solutions on agricultural methane and livestock emissions. And so one of the announcements that the summit will have is the $60 million that we have provided along with Bezos Earth Fund and Gates Foundation to reduce emissions with breakthrough technologies on livestock through methane vaccines, feed additives, or improved genomics, selecting animals that have lower methane emissions overall.
Wow, that's amazing. And so quickly that so many countries joined this, right? And I mean, it was really very rapid indeed. And I'm glad you brought up that slight elephant in the room, which is because I was checking all these kind of numbers on what not just companies, but governments report to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change on methane emissions. And you get these amazing graphs when you look at, say, what the satellites show versus even what governments think they're emitting. So it's a really interesting honesty mechanism in a sense to make sure that everybody knows what the situation is, and then they can make the choices about how they deal with it. So
companies self-underreport, but also governments sometimes import emission factors from other countries that don't represent what they're doing. And so therefore a lot of emissions are underestimated because of that reason.
It's good to point that out because I think average person out there, the average normal person goes, well, you know about it, so why don't you do something? But then you suddenly realize, actually, well, we didn't know really quite how big it was. So, you know, now we know the numbers, Okay, that's really good. Marcelo, stay with us because we're going to have a little chat later. Let me now introduce Stefania Abakerli. If I said that terribly badly, Stefania, then you must correct me, who is the coordinator of the CH4D, which I think the CH4 stands for methane. That's my schoolboy memory of what the methane molecular structure is done. And that's the initiative of the World Bank. And Stefania, this new finance methane development issue seeks a triple win, I understand, at scale. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're trying to achieve?
Thank you, Nick and Martina and Marcelo, all of you. It's wonderful to see you here from Washington. Nick, first you said my name perfectly. Thank you. The bank, our president, Jay Banga, he launched what we call the Methane Blueprint last year at COP29. And in the blueprint, it's based very much on the bank experience already on reducing methane, especially from the sectors that Marcelo was talking about, from waste, sanitation, and agriculture. And what we have seen in about a decade of working already on methane reduction is that this is not only a climate agenda, it's an essential good development agenda. That's where the triple wins come from. We have seen the first one, of course, is the mitigation, is the near-term gains we get in terms of reducing this very powerful super pollutant, methane, and other gases like nitrous oxide, black carbon. But also we see an enormous opportunity to build resilience of environmental systems. For instance, when you have a low methane rice cultivation, we have seen results as decreasing in 30-40% use of water, regenerating soils, and etc. And also an increase in economics, which is the third win, what we call empower livelihoods.
Super. And how far, I mean, when did it launch, and are you actually spending any money yet?
Yes. The blueprint was launched last COP at COP28. And right after that, together with the blueprint, he also established two trust funds. One is the Global Methane Reduction for Development, which, as you said, the CH4 standing for methane and D for development, which I coordinate as part of. It's held by the Climate Change Group, where I sit. I'm a climate change specialist. And the other one is the global flaring and methane reduction with my colleague Zubin, who is here as well. We'll talk later about it, focus on the energy. CH4G, we are the hub for methane reduction in the livestock, rice, waste and sanitation subsectors. We came from COP and we already launched our call for proposals. At the moment, we are supporting 24 countries. Our methane blueprint had an initial target of supporting 15 countries to slash about 10 million tons of methane and support 150 million people. And under CH4G, we are already supporting 24 countries. And Zubin will talk about GFMR, which is also supporting a dozen countries on the energy side.
Okay, Stefania, stay with us. We're going to go to our next guest, and I'm leaving that introduction to Martina.
Thanks, Nick. Yes, and Stefania already introduced Zubin Bamji, the manager of the Global Flaring and Methane Reduction Partnership at the World Bank. And Zubin, please tell us a bit more about the partnership, in how far it's special, and I think you also have a call to action for businesses, governments, and financial institutions. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martina and Nick. Nice to see some familiar faces, all of us working towards the same objective and agenda. So our trust fund, the Global Flaring and Methane Reduction Partnership, was announced at the last COP in Dubai and received support from governments and IOCs, international oil companies, to address the methane and flaring, which we all know represents a significant portion of the total methane emissions globally. So if you were to say that methane is about 30% globally, then out of that 30%, you're looking at about half of those emitters being developing countries. So this is a really important agenda for the World Bank and why we're so interested in supporting developing countries and emerging economies with this program. Now, some of you may recall the World Bank has worked on this for the last 20 years. We were quite early involved in flaring, and we had a small trust fund for the last 20 years that was focused on technical assistance to emerging economies. And this was things like helping them develop policies and regulations, capacity building, strengthening government institutions, this type of work, also doing some monitoring. We've done an annual report on flaring for several years right now, which reports and monitors through satellite detection. But now with our new trust fund, we hope to expand our work, which will include fugitive methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. And then also now we have enough funding to provide some grants, which we didn't have before, which is an exciting new approach for us at the World Bank, because what we hope to do is provide a little bit of financing or catalytic grants to governments and state-owned entities to address this problem, and then also to incentivize other financiers to come into the picture. So we would fund some monitoring and detection campaigns, what we in the industry call LDAR campaigns, which is leak detection and repair. We'll do pre-feasibility studies and feasibility studies, and potentially also provide some grant funding for those studies, which then presents the project to commercial banks, concessional financing, infrastructure financiers, developers of projects that would come in and then provide the rest of the financing to do these projects. So again, the big difference is we expand to include the fugitive methane, which is extremely important, and at the same time also hope to provide a little bit of grant funding from our trust fund.
Just a quick question back to you just on that, because I'm just thinking about the viewers right now. So this money is for developing country oil and gas industry, state companies and maybe private companies, but not necessarily for the richer country or the big private multinational companies, or is it?
No, that's exactly right, Nick.
Yeah.
It is for developing countries in which the World Bank works, right? That's our focus, to support these countries that have the least capacity, bandwidth, and ability to address these missions. So That's where we will focus our efforts, and it's always with the governments or government-owned or state-owned entities. We don't provide support to the private sector.
Right.
Of course, the private sector has their own resources and means to address this. Hopefully.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the average punter, normal person out there would welcome the support for the developing countries, but would be a little bit concerned if taxpayers' money was going to some of the big oil companies that can well afford it. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Just stay with us very much indeed, because we are very excited indeed to have another guest with us who is from the presidency, the host government of COP29. And you, I hope I say this correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So it's Faig, Mutallimov, great, who is the head of Environmental Policy Division, Ministry of Ecology and Natural Resources for Azerbaijan. And so I understand Azerbaijan is a member of the UN Environment Programme's Climate and Clean Air Coalition since last year. And you've also, I think, got a global methane pledge, which is super. And here at COP29, you're championing many things, but you're also championing the issue of reducing organic waste. So that fits with the methane and the landfill story. It's a declaration which you're hoping to get through by the end of the COP. Tell us a little bit about why this is important for Azerbaijan. Why is it important to get this declaration through, maybe from a domestic point of view, but also, of course, it could help internationally as well. So over to you, Faig.
Thank you very much, first of all, for invitation me to this important meeting. And yes, you are correct. Azerbaijan has joined to CCAC and also joined the Global Methane Pledge this year. So it also shows our dedication to the reducing of global greenhouse gases through addressing the methane. And there are, as already mentioned, there are several sectors that with the high methane intensity, and one of them is the waste sector. And we believe that our initiative that we put forward on the reducing methane from the organic waste is the kind of complement to the global methane pledge, and we by this we will address the specific sector in this pledge, focusing on the waste management. Azerbaijan has a national strategy on waste management where we are planning to the shift from the regional waste management strategy, and also we are currently building the infrastructure and all these things to reduce the impact of the waste management. And in Baku we have the very let's say modern system of waste management, and we have the waste to energy plant where we produce actually the electricity, and we are doing the sorting, and we are doing the separate collection and etc. So by this our strategy, we will expand this our practice in the regions, and we understand also that from the reports of UNEP and the other source that the waste sector is one of the issue is growing because a number of the waste generated, and also the problems in the food waste, waste loss, and etc. It also bring the the point is the finance visit. So the finance requirement for management of this increasing waste will be about doubled by the 2050. So the declaration and our initiative is to address this issue, and we have the 5 main enabling areas, and one of them is of course the stepping the finance, and also the have the specific attention in the upcoming indices on the waste sector and reduce the methane in this sector, and also support the parties in the provision of the data, because the data is very important for the transparency and addressing the data-driven the policies, and also capacity building and integrating all these issues in the national and regional policies, so that we believe that we have already some signatories, or more than 20 countries already joined this to this initiative, and together with support of the UNEP and CCAC, we have built this the initiative, and we hope that this will also build momentum on this issue waste sector.
So that's interesting. I mean, we know that if food waste and food loss was a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Quite a lot of that being methane, I presume. So it's a really important topic. And just let me ask you, when you say regionally, you mean the governments, the countries around Azerbaijan as a regional initiative? Is that the thinking when you say a regional thing? Does it mean you're working with other countries in the region on this?
Our initiative is a global initiative. We call all the countries to join this initiative.
Yeah.
But in our national strategy, we would like to shift actually from the district management of the waste to the regional management, to decrease the number of for example, 50, 60 landfills to 8 regional landfills. This also will support our initiative to reduce the methane and waste management.
Okay. Martina, you're moving your hand there.
Exactly, I'm moving my hand because I'd love to get into that topic as well, because there are regional elements to that as well. Latin America, for example, there's a movement there. They would like to close dump sites, for example, and there's a real push for this. So there's regional leadership, and that's very exciting. And what makes me really, really thrilled about this declaration is that it takes us out of the space of capturing the problem at the end, when it has occurred already, when we look at methane capture from landfills, which is obviously something what we must do, because we can't let this resource escape and fuel climate change. But we have to do all the different steps beforehand. There's opportunities. You mentioned food waste. So why don't we feed people but feed climate change? Why don't we use some of the residues that could actually be turned into a useful product and thereby become circular economy? Why don't we look at some of the solutions that nature provide us to turn waste into protein, for example, and thereby revalorize? And that's really exciting that this initiative is actually taking all these upfront steps as well.
Good.
So I think this is pretty cool.
So it sounds like, so we're hoping at the end of the COP we will get a declaration on this backed by as many countries as possible, and that would be a good win for Azerbaijan here at COP29. Yeah,
we hope so. And we will have the launch event on 19th of November, where we will officially launch this initiative, and we hope that we will have the interest.
Great. So stay with us, because we're going to just dig a little bit deeper. But I just wanted to ask Ingmar Rentzhog, who is the CEO of We Don't Have Time, and also now a passionate convert to the methane story. And Ingmar, come and join us on, because we're going to have a little chat also with our dear friends back in the World Bank. We don't forget you. I know it's difficult when you're on Zoom and we're live in the studio, but we haven't forgotten you, so please stay with us if you can. So good. As I said, so Ingmar Rentzhog, founder of We Don't Have Time, now a passionate advocate as of, a few weeks ago, I think it was, on the methane story, which is why we're doing so much on it. What do you think about that, Martina?
Fantastic. Welcome to the crowd. We have been working on this for the past decade and plus. So, but it's a really important topic, and we've taken it from a methane moment to a momentum, and now to a movement. And we look forward that this actually helps build.
So
the
you've been
movement
working on
further.
it for 12 years, and he's just heard about it. What's going on here? What do you say, Ingmar?
Actually, what opened my mind about this were actually when I watched another previous episode on We Don't Have Time, I understood that methane and other short-lived climate gases is not just another problem we need to solve, it's actually a solution that will give us more time to solve everything else. So the time aspect is very important. Previously, when I heard about methane, and kind of the narrative about methane is that it's a stronger climate gas, that 86 times stronger than carbon dioxide. That's true, but what's the interesting part is the short-lived. We don't need to remove it from the atmosphere because it's only up there for a couple of years. If we stop emitting it, we will actually reverse global warming, not completely, but enough to give us more time to do everything else.
Okay. Good. All right. Let's have a little chat about this. Let's just dig in a little bit deeper with all our wonderful guests, including in the World Bank. Okay, there's a lot of promises right now. There's a lot of promises everywhere. Everybody wants to do something. There's obviously momentum on the methane story, and that's really fantastic. But how do we ensure that the pledges not maybe have teeth, but kind of, work in a sense? How can we, there are big sectors of the economy out there who are part of this story. And yeah, agriculture is a huge sector. Oil and gas industry is a huge sector. Waste, I suppose, is a huge sector too. I've never really thought about it. And you even mentioned coal mining, which goes under the radar, right? These are huge parts of the global industry. Do you get the sense, and this is an open question to anybody here, that, for example, these sectors of the economy finally get that they can be part of something good and they want to act? Anybody want to answer this question? Do you get the sense that the sectors are on board with real action now? Stefania?
Nick, yes, because as is being said, climate change is affecting everybody. For instance, the farmers, they know very well that they have to do things different. Cities, which are responsible for managing waste, they know they have to do things different. There is no way of business as usual. And again, as we are saying, methane is going back to the notion of triple wins. When you think it's about good development, everything you do to lower methane makes life and the economy better. You strengthen. For instance, in our experience, let me go back to the example of rice. When we were working in Vietnam, we support 1 million farmers, and these are very smallholder farmers. They own less than 2 hectares. And when we help them to adopt low methane practices, for instance, a little drying their fields because what emits methane is the rotting of matter in the pads, they were able to increase in about 45% the yields, and with that their income. So now, for instance, the government of Vietnam has adopted this test case of working in 200,000 hectares, and they are upscale this across between 1 to 3 million hectares in the Mekong area, where it's the main producer of rice, and the rice is the white gold in Vietnam, which is the main source of the economy. So governments, they understand that. But what we need to do is to work at scale. We have done the pilots, we have done the small little work. We need to come together. For instance, we work as the World Bank, we are working with CCAC. They are a big scientific partner for us. We are working with Marcelo and the philanthropics to support us to upscale. So we are coming, all of us together, playing by our strengths and work at scale. And my final point here is, for instance, looking at CH4D, when we look at livestock, we are working now with 12 countries, 4 of each, which is China, India, Brazil, 3 of each, sorry, China, India, Brazil, they account for 66% of the cattle population in the world. When we work on rice, we are working with the 4 countries that account for 65% of the rice production and consumption. So we are working big scale, and that's what we need. And for that, we need to come together more and more and stop the fragmentation, joining forces and building on the strengths. of
Right.
each of us. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. We'll come to another person in a second. I just want to inform the guests here that you may see another person on the right-hand screen, but he's actually not part of this show, so the audience doesn't see him. But it's a new technology, so I just want to reassure you that he's in Sweden. He's on next after this show. So, is there anybody else who wants to respond to that? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, same goes with what Stefania was saying. I used to be environment minister for Chile, and I had landfills catching fire. The tools of satellite monitoring that allow you to see where the methane emissions are, allow you to see and predict where the fires are going to exist. Mm-hmm. But also, I had communities complaining about foul odors nearby the landfills. And so you could show that the interventions that you have had reduce emissions, but also reduce the foul odors. So there's a local benefit. And we've been able to work with cities like Mumbai or Delhi, or Sao Paulo or Santiago, that have the same objective. Also, when you divert organic waste from a landfill, you extend the life of landfills, which are all ending, right? Mm-hmm. So people don't know where to put the trash. Mm-hmm. So when, instead of dumping it, organic waste, it's a resource in a landfill that will either cause methane or cause fire, you actually generate things that could help us fight desertification, for example, with composting and soil enhancements that are very positive. So that's a solution you're bringing to people that are actually spending more and more time and money in landfilling further and further away. In Chile, there's cities that actually some of the trash goes 700 kilometers. So if you're able to provide a solution that's local, it's a solution that governments can rally around, usually underfunded. In the case of agriculture, when we're talking with our friends from Danone that have a productivity problem in Morocco, that animals don't produce enough milk, when we come in and help farmers have better feeding formulations that actually allow them to increase yield 3 to 4 times, it leaves more income for farmers. It leaves the opportunity for that livestock producer, for the family to continue that and not have to migrate to a city and with all the problems that we see with this unplanned migration. So there's very big benefits. And the final one is the energy sector. And here we'll have a carrot that's big enough to be a stick, which is the concept of the European Union has established a standard that they will not let other big leaking sources of oil and gas be introduced to that market. If you want to access that market, you need to reduce emissions. And so that's why the US, Canada, and Australia are supporting this work. That's why Korea and Japan also want this approach. If we're able to crack this with this approach, we could cover 70% of all global oil and gas production, potentially having a mandate, because it's a market mandate. If you want to access this market, you need to reduce emissions. But also, you can save money but while doing so.
So you've actually stolen one of my key questions I was going to ask later, which was about regulation. But Martina, go.
I'm happy to come in on regulation. And the thing is, I mean, we talked about the fossil fuel sector and, that there's a big difference between the private sector and the national oil companies, and in terms of means as well. And
you mean the private oil companies and the state-owned?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Exactly. And here the IEA put out a number that doing everything we need in terms of reducing leakage, venting and flaring to reduce methane in that sector would cost as much as 2% of what the industry made in 2022.
That
And
was $4 trillion US dollars.
Exactly. And that is a pretty amazing number. And why is it not done? And we do say all these measures are actually negative cost, which means profit in the end. But the problem is you can make more profit if you drill for new oil fields, for example. And obviously a company is after return on investment, so it's a logical company decision. So that's where the regulation comes in. We need to do more on that, and here we help, we support countries with their own legislation. That's one. So in some cases we need that. Landfill regulation. There's a whole movement at the moment as well. It's one of the sectors as well for your 5 buckets in the declaration. One is actually on regulation. So there is something as well to divert
Organic waste
the
away
organic
from
waste
the landfill.
from the
yeah.
landfills.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other part is, and Marcelo painted a really good picture on that already, what is in it for the people who have to act? So what is in it for the farmer? So productivity gains. So there's a number of those examples. But there's also an adaptation measure. For example, rice fields. If we use the technique is alternate wet and drying, so that we don't consistently flood the fields, which then leads to the methane emissions. That's a water measure, water saving measure, which can be an adaptation measure to more droughts. So
Good point.
looking at
Anybody? I mean, and I just say with regulation. I mean, people. I'm old enough to remember when you didn't wear seatbelts in cars, right? And when they brought seatbelts in, everybody in Britain went, "Oh, that's no fun anymore. It's more fun wearing the seatbelt." But the regulation came in, and nobody even thinks about it now. It's just what you do, right? Faig, you come in there, and then I'll ask Ingmar to come in.
Yeah, I just want to say example from our case. For example, our state oil and gas company SOCAR last year at COP28 joined to the oil and gas decarbonization charter with the goal to reduce the methane by near zero by 2035 and reach the net zero in all operations by 2050 and prepare the decarbonization pathway and roadmap to reach. And also just recently they have joined to the UNEP's OGMP, oil and gas methane pledge, which also brings the regulations and reporting the standards and etc. So that I think that this is also some showcase of dedication to reach these goals. And both the ministry and also I just recently heard that this state oil company also joined this IMEO, it's the International Methane Emission Observatory. We receive this notification each time they detect any leakage, and this also received by the company. And we address to this if as a such case how they address this leakage if there. So that I think all of this collaboration and exchange of the information, data and experience will build around will help the countries to address this methane emission from different sectors.
So it's alerts to a leakage in real time, which is amazing if you think about it, right?
The Central
Yeah.
5P from the European Space Agency has that. And so the
Yeah,
response assist works, and there's multiple other satellites that are on board that have actually very high capacity and they are transparent. And so therefore we will see the emissions regardless of reporting or not.
Ingmar, you wanted to come in.
I wanted to reflect on the two questions. Do the sectors know about this? Are they working on it and the regulation? And I can just give an example. In Sweden, we don't have any fossil fuel extracting industry. We have already taken care of methane in our waste. We hardly have any methane emission from waste at all. But we have agriculture sector. And I was speaking on a panel with the whole agriculture sector in Sweden, the whole food, biggest food chains, dairy, all the sector were present in the room. And not a single person in that audience know about the methane pledge. That Sweden has signed the methane pledge to reduce 40% methane. They didn't even know about it. How will a sector that don't know about the pledge going to fulfill that pledge? We need regulation, and what Buy More Time is advocating for is not just talking about that it's important. We actually need something similar like the Montreal Protocol. We stopped release freons and the ozone layer is now healing. We need something similar, and we don't need 200 countries to start with. The Montreal Protocol were only 46 countries and some industry players and some finance, and that made it happen. We can do something similar here. Maybe something for Azerbaijan to kind of kick off here at COP.
It's a thought. It's a thought. I'm very conscious of Zubin here on Zoom. Zubin, you haven't spoken because you can't kind of grab my attention. Do you have any more thoughts on this accountability? Are people now playing the game that they need to play? Because it's the last game was Russian roulette. We want another game, right?
Yeah, I think some interesting points and good points were made earlier, Nick, and that's why I kind of let the others speak a little bit more. Well, here's the thing on regulation. Absolutely, this is what we consider foundational type of work. It levels the playing field and ensures that all operators in a country abide by the same rules when it comes to flaring and methane. Now, this is an emerging part as well. There are many countries that produce oil and gas that don't even have basic regulatory frameworks and policies. And so this is something that we strongly advocate for. And again, the regulation is good. Some countries even have regulation, but then it's not adequately enforced. And the penalties for, say, flaring are not material enough to incentivize the operators to actually do something rather than continuing to flare the gas and allow the methane to leak out. So there has to be an economic case to be made in the regulations that incentivizes these operators to stop flaring and methane. And then the other question about are people doing enough about methane? And the answer is yes. There are many operators and governments doing something about it now. Perhaps some of this delay can be attributed to the fact that until recent years, we weren't able to detect the methane, right? As was said earlier, it's just in the last several years where the technologies for satellite monitoring and other ways of monitoring methane emissions have come on board with a high degree of confidence and ability to detect these methanes. So now that this is coming on board, hopefully we're going to see some of these operators and governments accelerate their efforts and put their plans in place. Because certainly when it comes to flaring, you can start working on something now, but it takes a long time to actually implement these projects because it requires sometimes infrastructure and a variety of other things, of course, getting the financing in place as well. So these are some of the challenges we're seeing and why many of the emerging economies around the world need this kind of support and help. Often when we meet with a government agency, the first thing they say to us is, boy, there's a lot of technologies out there. There's a lot of associations, industry organizations, civil society that have been coming to us and asking us to do something and join this initiative and that pledge. And it's all very confusing to us. So could you please try and help us make sense of it? What are the first few things we should be doing to address our flaring and methane emissions? And that's why it's really important, as was said earlier by a couple of my fellow panelists and speakers, that it really requires coordination amongst all of these industry organizations, civil society, governments, the private sector, the financiers, the banks. It requires a lot of coordination, and we like to play a little bit of this coordinating role at the World Bank. As you know, we are a convening power, and this is some of the work that we'd like to do. Thanks.
Good. We've only got about 10 more minutes, or maybe even less actually, but there's a little clicker there. You can see counting us down, and I promise you a rocket will not go off in the studio. If it does, we better run very fast, but that's what we got left. Let's try and look forward rather than where we are. What do you, and this is to everybody, what has to happen next, right? So we're on a launch path to something maybe pretty good, not least because we don't have time, but we're on a launch path to something pretty good. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen in the next 12 months? What's going to happen up to 2030? Can we, if we put our shoulders against the wheel, have a chance of halving global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 if we act on methane and maybe some of the other super pollutants with the CO2 as well, of course? What's going to happen next year and the year after? Is there a journey, a road plan? Is it just money? Is it more policy? Is it regulation? What do we need now? Yeah? Who wants to jump in on this? Thank you.
So you're talking about the fact that mitigating methane and other short-lived pollutants is the fastest way to reduce temperature in the short term. We're nearing the 1.5 degree threshold, if not surpassing it. The only way we will reduce temperature within our lifetimes is focusing on short-lived climate mitigation now. So what I hope will happen at COP30, a major emitter of methane too, is seizing on the opportunities, but also presenting this as a great opportunity to pull an emergency brake on climate change, rising temperatures, having a focus, a protocol specific on short-lived climate pollutants. We could reduce in total 0.5 degrees, 0.3 from methane, and bring local benefits. In the case of Brazil, improve productivity for farmers, higher resilience in the production of rice, lower emissions from landfills that are having problems and causing conflict, environmental conflict. And so I think it is aligned. Brazil is interested, China has the target, the EU is standing strong with the global methane pledge, and 158 countries are still in this. So I do believe that there is merit to this, because when you mitigate methane and other short-lived climate pollutants, the benefits stay where action is taken. It dissipates the question, why should I act when it's not the big emitters? Because you do get local benefits that actually bring development benefits that we are so hard to find.
I just want to say one thing that's really interesting. Before we came to the COP, some of my friends back home were saying, oh God, the world's going to hell, there's war everywhere, everything's, the guide rules of how we were supposed to be organizing the world are falling apart. And I said, yeah, but it's interesting, right? Even when things are going bad, China and the USA are still on climate change, cooperating. I don't know whether that will last, but anyway, we don't need to go into that. But, the world is still cooperating on climate change despite what's going on in the world right now.
2 days after the election, China submitted for the first time a methane target. They don't do things by coincidence.
They don't just do that for propaganda reasons. They do it because they really mean it, right? Anybody else from the World Bank? What's next? What do we need? Yeah?
Yeah, well, I could come in.
Zubin, no, I'm going to have Stefania, only for gender balance.
Okay.
Thank you. The first thing we are doing is we are now upscaling. We are mainstreaming methane abatement across our entire portfolio. So Zubin is working about 12 countries on energy, and we are working at 24. Now the order is to mainstream completely across our portfolio. That's one. There are other things we are doing as well, and I just want to throw one point here that I think is important we haven't mentioned, and it goes back to regulation, which is subsidies, perverse incentives. There is about $600 billion annually being spent on perverse subsidies that are leading our farmers, for instance, to use synthetic fertilizer that is giving taxpayer to industries linked to fossil fuels. This is a very this is a low-hanging fruit. It's hard to work on incentives, but the money is out there. And that's something when we talk about regulation is also talk about what are the existing policies and how can we change it. And there are plenty of governments out there which want to change these regulations. You were talking about China, for instance. Our methane portfolio, we are working on rice, livestock, and waste. It's all informing the new pollution control national policy of China. And many of the 24 countries, 23 countries are using the portfolio, it's financed by the World Bank, to come up with very tangible and ambitious NDC targets on methane. So I just want to throw here that there are many, it's from farmer to governments. There is a lot of movement, a lot of interest. It's perhaps just a question of giving a name, as Marcelo and Ingmar was saying, to the short pollutants. But the movement is out there, but we need to keep focus. Nick, we cannot divert and do 100 things. We need to do one. And the year now, until 2030, is short pollutants.
Okay. Stefania, Zubin, very briefly now, because we've got 4.5 minutes left.
Sure. So I suppose to answer your question, Nick, it's all of the above, right? As is often the case. So we need to improve regulation and focus on what seems to be working and incentivizing operators. We need to work on the financing side of methane, which again is an emerging side of things. We also still need to see the technology evolve and improve. whether it's detection or otherwise. So we got to work on all of these fronts, and that's why, again, it requires a lot of coordination amongst all of us, hoping to achieve some dramatic emissions reductions over the coming years. Now, with our trust fund, what we hope to say over the next year or so is do more projects with some of these governments and operators. For example, we have one project in a country that makes a strong economic case. It's not just the climate angle, it's the economic case, which is if you stop flaring, if you plug these leaks of methane, you actually have a financial return in many cases. And that money that you receive by addressing your emissions can be put back into a fund that is programmatic, long-term approach to methane reduction. So you continuously use that money to continue to plug your leaks and address your flaring and methane emissions. There are solutions like this.
You brought the word sustainable finance in there. It goes back into a pod and it keeps going round.
Yep, somewhat of sustainable, exactly.
Okay,
Yep,
super. Thank you very much. So, 4 guests here, not much time. Who wants to, we're going to start wrapping up here, but one question I have is, the finance that's all being spent on methane right now, and obviously it needs to be more in the pot, does that contribute to the COPs? Does that contribute to climate finance when people start calculating the numbers?
Yes, it does, but it's also important to say only 2% of all climate finance today is going to methane.
Right.
It's 50% of the warming, 2% of the funding.
Right.
So that's why we're working with groups like the World Bank and the IDB and others to increase that substantially.
Yes. Okay. From the point of view of Azerbaijan, you'll be now going forward with all these various plans, including on the oil and gas industry. There seems to be a roadmap, and that's very positive indeed. Can you persuade others to join, as it were? Can you persuade other oil and gas state companies or whatever to join in this effort?
Yes. I think that this global methane pledge that the countries already joined showcases that how the parties approach to this. I would like to touch the other sector, the agriculture. I think it's also very important, the sector which carries a lot of social burden, not only in Azerbaijan, I think all over the world. And we also plan and started engagement with CCAC to look at the development of the specific roadmap to reduce the methane flow from the agriculture sector, because we need to here be very careful when we introducing the subsidies and also the support, so that we have this shift very smooth, not compromising the agriculture development, and also to reduce the methane from this sector. In other sectors, of course, I already said that Azerbaijan is dedicated to reduce methane emission from the oil and gas and our state company, and hopefully that the other countries will also be such dedicated in this process. And also for the waste sector, we have a national strategy. We would like to build on it and enhance this this strategy all over the country. And I think that Mr. Martina said a very important point here, that our ultimate goal not to bring all the waste to the landfill and then generate something. One of our goals that we pursue is to make from the waste and contribute to the circular economy. That actually in the heart of our strategy on waste management.
So the message I've got out of this is that we have a huge opportunity to make a big dent in global warming, maybe even meet the dream of halving emissions by 2030 and keeping 1.5 degrees centigrade alive if we get aggressive as a global community on methane. And also I hear that we need more money for this endeavor, particularly in the developing countries. But then there are ways of actually making money out of this as well. So it's about economics as well. And it's about how you clearly glimpse economics. Because if you priced in the cost of killing the planet from climate change, then everything that we're talking about right now would be instantly financed because there'd be no other place to do it, right? So, I mean, it's a question of how you actually view the global economics and green economics and what works in favor. Ingmar, you want to make a brief question because we're over time. Yeah.
So we don't have time. I'm used to that. I will say that I think we need to put money to the table, and those that are working on limiting methane emission, we should not penalize them. We should pay them, but someone needs to pay, and there is an industry out there, the oil, coal, and gas industry. They actually make a lot of money, and as you told, they just need a fraction of that profit to pay for it. So I think it's in their interest too. I mean, oil and gas also want to have a future, right? So let's get the money to the table, funnel it into those that are limiting the emission, including oil and gas itself, of course. So an oil company not limiting emissions should pay to an oil company limiting the emission.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to close it down there. I'm sorry, Martina, and everybody else. I'm sure we could all talk for another 10 days on this. Well, that's what they do at COPs. They talk for more than 10 days. But we can't because we've got some other wonderful guests coming in from Stockholm on other topics to do with climate change. Thank you so much for being with us. I think that was really interesting. We're doing a daily show on methane. Please tune in. It's every day at 15:30 Baku, a local time, just for 30 minutes. This was an hour because it was the first show. Thanks to the Climate and Clean Air Coalition for your support. And bye-bye for the moment.